The visualization is an incubator. It's a safe, healing environment of your active imagination, where you draw on the inspiration of enlightened beings, and particularly warm, successful, positive, nurturing, real relationships that your mind can graft to download the nutrients that are required to continue the journey of development. And why stop at ordinary development, like you could just grow into a better parent? No, why couldn't you grow into a Buddha, fully awakened, fully compassionate, fully effective, capable of changing radical swaths of society? Now, if you're anything like me, you could really get all choked up about what's happening to the ocean right now, what's happening to the wars that are plaguing society, what's happening to the vast economic divide on this planet, what's happening with tyrannical fundamentalist organizations on this planet. This is really time for us to be really considering big picture, not just the myopic, which is, myopic not in the pejorative sense, but not just about me getting better, but me having some kind of optimal impact on a sphere of influence that, it could start with our immediate family or just one relationship or our colleagues, but why stop there? As you grow your capacity and your confidence, so does the sphere of influence in which you think you could make a maximal impact. Of course, that's always driven by what's called bodhicitta. Even tonight, it dawned on me, because I was a preemie. I was actually 3 months premature, which is like, borderline death. They called in the priest and, last rites and everything. Incubator is what saved my life. An incubator is a foreign environment in which all the nutrients and safety and conditions, the optimal conditions for the development to continue. It's like a half-cooked turkey. You gotta throw it back in so that it can finish its job, right? Where we're basically a traumatized society. Our development, it gets much better than this. It can be much better than this. Most of us are just trying to wing it the best we can, thinking, I could pay my rent and, I've had a few highs and a nice vacation. No, it can get much better than that. It's a supremely optimistic philosophy that many of you who aren't ready to entertain that are recoiling right now as you listen to this, because you're so convinced, because the emission of the signal from the black box is telling you you're not entitled to a life much better than this. Do you hear me? Everybody's so quiet right now. It's about to... So right now our life cycle looks something like born into trauma and misery, flailing around, trying to make a few pennies, pumping out a few puppies, trying to go for the white picket fence, doesn't work out, couldn't pay our taxes, and then you get old and you get break your hip and you die. And that's supposedly success, because you have a few televisions and you have you bought yourself a car. Maybe these days you were able to send your kid to school, but probably not. Saddled with debt your whole life. You get the picture. That whole narration can be completely transformed by reversing the process and having a conscious death, re-arising or being reborn in your optimal environment, your incubator with mentor beings, positive role models, where you germinate the soul to its maximal, optimal level or development, and then you reintegrate into society, trying to change the very infrastructure of society. Now that's called a hero's journey. In Joseph Campbell's parlance, it's very similar. You start in the Shire. You know the Shire? It's kind of comfortable, but you're not going anywhere. You can have your 3 square meals and look at the birds, but something's really not fundamentally growing. And what happens is eventually suffering comes knocking and reminds you that you're mortal. And some people do this, and some people go looking for answers. The people that are looking for answers are the people that are on the spiritual journey. They answer the call. They answer the call, they leave the Shire, they leave what's comfortable, they leave what is predictable, they leave all their security blanket, Linus's blanket, they leave it. And they venture into the deep, dark forest. And before they do, maybe if they're lucky, they meet a few people who have already navigated the forest. These are the Obi-Wan Kenobis that teach you how to wield a weapon that's actually going to help you along your journey. But at some point in the deep, dark forest, you find a demon or a dragon, which is your belief about yourself. And you slay the dragon because you've been preparing your whole life for that moment. And the journey doesn't stop when you slay the dragon. The journey only stops when you understand fully, you fully inhabit the role of the hero, the confidence of the hero, and come back out of the forest and back into civilization, bearing the elixir of immortality in which to save other living beings. And that's the full completion of the hero's journey according to Joseph Campbell. And if I'm not mistaken, if you go home tonight and you pick your favorite myth from whatever culture, from whatever time in history, from whatever religion, folklore, fairy tale, Alice in Wonderland, Matrix, you name it, Star Wars, superhero fascination of comic books, it's all the same. It's all called the monomyth, the epic of the hero's journey, coming full circle, defeating the self and coming back as a hero to save the planet. There's so many meditations on the market. There's mindfulness, there's yoga, there's energy work, there's compassion practice, there's lojong, there's slogans, there's affirmations, there's things like The Secret, there's detoxes, there's diets. Why complicate things with a really arduous course that has lists and endless lists and even more lists and of all the mechanisms underlying this really weird thing of having an imaginary relationship with a deity in your mind? We have to do this. We have to come up with a compelling reason why to do it. Otherwise, there won't be the buy-in. So, I've already said this, but just to reiterate it, from the Tibetan perspective, we've already drunk the Kool-Aid. We are all right now having a consensusly agreed on visualization. We're all visualizing already. So when you get all bent out of shape, I can't visualize, I can't see it. From a Tibetan perspective, you're already doing it, mate. You're already doing it. Everything that you're experiencing right now is a construction. It's a fabrication. It's a projection. How do we know that? Even quantum physics and current neuroscience is confirming this. What's basically happening, and I'm not a neuroscientist, so if there are more qualified people, please chime in. But in the nutshell, in what Joe calls his quantum theory of consciousness, what's essentially happening is that bits of data from the external environment are coming through our perceptual lens. And what's meeting them is that our perception has filters, 3 kinds of filters. From Dan Siegel, does anyone remember what the 3 kinds of filters are? Memory. One is called memory, one is called emotions, and expectations or anticipations. Memory, emotions, and anticipations are meeting the data, the raw material of reality, at the door. Memory. If you were raised in a hostile environment during childhood with an alcoholic parent, and you felt powerless, and you felt helpless, and you were primed to protect yourself by being hyper-vigilant about every cue and nick and cranny and who's coming down the hall and who's opening up my door, then that's what's awaiting the data of reality. That's memory. You start to, what's that phrase? If you're a hammer, then what? Everything's a nail. If you're traumatized, then your brain is primed to receive data in a certain configuration. It's a selective data interpretation. Subcortical, subconscious, automatic. Receiving reality. But then we forget that the brain is doing this. One of the very powerful things that we learned from Dan Siegel, I actually think this is one of the most powerful things, is that memory is revisable. It's so compelling because many of the people that I work with in psychotherapy say, well, these horrible things befell me as a child, but they just happened and they can't be undone. But what they fail to consider is that, yes, horrible events happen to us, but the minute they happen to us, we store an interpretation of them. That goes subcortical, it goes buried into the black box underneath the oceans of consciousness. And then every time we're receiving data is a revision of that original memory, further contaminated by the second two factors, which were what? Memory, next one? Emotion. So if you are receiving data through the perceptual filters that have been contaminated by memory store banks in your brain, and you're really angry or really sad or really hypervigilant or really fearful, then that starts to color the perception and the experience. And when you have that experience, it gets refiled and reconsolidated as a second, third, fourth layer or generation on the memory. So your memory is not static or fixed. It's being revised constantly. Unfortunately, it's being revised in the negative way. Because every time you pour hostile emotions or threatening emotions on top of the original memory, you're making it into a more compelling traumatic story. Now the third feature, we have memory, we have emotion, is expectation. So now you're just trying to get along in New York City. You're just trying to get to work on time. You're just trying to produce whatever you need to produce. But you're on alert. You're on guard. This is what Mark Epstein calls not post-traumatic stress disorder, but pre-traumatic stress disorder. You're buckling down, trying to prevent what you think is an inevitable occurrence. Now you're marshaling all your attention to watch out for who's going to backstab you, who's going to bail on you. Anticipation. Now what that serves is that's the brain doing what's now called a negativity bias. So through the course of evolution, our brain started to select out certain important information from the environment. By holding onto it and expecting it, what we would do was ensure our survival. So you probably remembered, like, around that corner there was a saber-toothed tiger, but down by the river is much safer. But your memory holds on to the fact that around the corner is a saber-toothed tiger, because if you forgot it, you would die. Now we have survived evolution, and we've merged into civilization. We enter into a different epoch in the human story. We don't need all the wiring. Now we can take on consciousness can be the informative feedback rather than memory from the past. Now consciousness can be more selective. But unfortunately, we haven't trained consciousness. So all we have is the feedback of our neurobiology, which is not that optimal. It's a wonderful thing, but if it's hijacked by a defensive first apparatus, and it's selective in its negativity and steering through the data by filtering out what's going to kill me, what's going to eat me, who's going to leave me, what we do is we portion out all the nutrients that would ordinarily come in and feed the soul, the love, the care, the joy, the excitement. There's no possibility, there's no avenue in, because the brain is structured in a way just to focus on the negative. So that's the expectation factor. So now we have storage of negative, hostile, traumatic memory. We have the elicitation of really active chemicals that lead to emotions, such as shame and fear are my favorite choices. And then we have anticipation. So that's what's waiting at the door every single time anything is happening in reality. And that's why you can be sitting next to 3 people on this side and 3 people on that side and have the same exact situation befall all 7 of you. And what's being experienced is 7 different interpretations, 7 different emotional reactions, 7 different ways of relating to experience. Why? Because of these filters.